Alright, this is going to be the last video, chapter 34. I'll start by going over a quiz. If I can review it. There we go. Alright, so when a Japanese firm buys Canadian lumber, this transaction appears as a... So this is a balance of payments question. So let's take a quick look, at the balance of payments stuff. So balance of payments, there's two separate accounts. We have the current account and then we have the capital account. And you can think of them kind of as like assets and liabilities or whatever, in that they have to add to zero. Current plus capital always equals zero. The current account is split up into a couple of things. It has the trade account, which has our exports and our imports. Exports will increase the current account and imports will decrease it. Then we have our capital service account, which is like income, dividends from stocks, that kind of thing. And then we have net transfers of money. That's stuff just like I give money to my grandma in France. That would increase or decrease the account depending on if the money's coming in or out. And then on the other hand, we have capital account. So this is the changes in ownership of assets. So that's like investment stuff. And then changes in official international reserves, which is the official financing account. The way I like to think about the balance of payments is I'd like to think about it as a liability account if you've taken accounting, in that it increases with a credit and decreases with a debit. So if we keep that in mind, also important to note here, I took down the capital account deals with capital inflows and outflows, not the capital service account, which is part of the current account. Yeah. So this transaction appears when they buy Canadian lumber. So that is a export, right? So an export increases our current account balance. And how do we increase the balance of a liability? We credit it. So it appears as a credit on the current account for Canada. Okay, consider the balance of payments. What is the current account balance? So we have exports, imports, net foreign investment income, capital outflows, capital inflows. So our capital outflows and inflows are again going to be part of this capital account. So we're not going to worry about that for this one. We're just going to worry ourselves with the exports, imports, and net foreign investment income. So exports minus imports is 150, right? So right now we're at a positive balance of 150. And the net foreign investment income is negative 60. So 150 minus 60 is 90. So we're at a balance of 90 billion right there. Other things being equal, a depreciation in the Canadian dollar leads to, well, if our dollar depreciates, then it makes every other country that trades with us richer, in a way, relatively richer, because now they can come into our country and buy things for cheaper, because they can take their $100 and maybe before it gave them 90 Canadian dollars and now it gives them 120 Canadian dollars. So they're $30 richer if they convert their dollars to our dollars. So we're going to see an increase in the number in tourism pretty much because our prices are so cheap. And to go back to that, kind of a historical example that's related to us is back when our exchange rate with the US was in our favor, the Canadian dollar was worth more, it was pretty common that people would go to Buffalo or to Niagara to go shopping just for the day to buy stuff because it was cheaper there. Consider the market in which Canadian dollars are exchanged for British pounds. An increased preference in Canadian consumers for British goods would. So let's go over to our model here. This is our model. I'm trying to find a good one. Maybe I'll just draw one. So our model for financial capital looks like this. So we have the supply of financial capital and the demand of financial capital. And this is, sorry, not financial capital, foreign currency. I don't know why I said that. This is the market for foreign currency. the market for foreign currency, and it's measured against the exchange rate, and the number of units of currency. So this is foreign currency. So if we are Canada, this is, in this case, British pounds. So what it said in the question was that we want more British goods. So in order to buy more British goods, we need to use their currency, which is British pounds. So our demand for British pounds has increased. And we move up here. So we notice that the exchange rate has increased in order to get that greater number of units of currency. Now, what happens when our exchange rate increases? Well, that means that it takes more Canadian dollars to purchase 1 unit of foreign currency. Remember, the exchange rate is equal to units of our currency to purchase 1 unit of another. So right now, it may be with the US like 1.3, which says that we need 1.3 Canadian dollars to purchase a US dollar, something like that. So if the exchange rate goes up, that means it takes more of our dollars to purchase one of the other dollar. So an exchange rate going up means there is depreciation of our dollar. Depreciation. So what we see here is the demand will shift to the right, and there will be an increase in the exchange rate and a depreciation of the dollar. A fall in the exchange rate indicates opposite, an appreciation of the Canadian dollar, because they're inversely related. Long-term international capital movements are largely influenced by, we're talking about long-term international capital movements, that's things like big investments. So like, where is Amazon going to put their next headquarters? That's a long-term capital movement. And what they're going to do, well, they're going to look at what country is business friendly, and where they think that it has a good economy. So we're looking at things like profit opportunities and the general business environment. That's what you care about for those long-term movements. We can expect that an increase in Canadian interest rates caused by monetary contraction would. So interest rates, right here, is what happens is that stimulates foreign investment, because what it's going to do is when our interest rates are higher, more foreigners, they can make more money, because if they have a house, now they're earning more interest on that house. Don't mix us up with, as interest rates rise, investment falls. This is foreign investment. This is investments that are already owned. They're now going to be more profitable. So foreigners are going to liquidate their assets in other countries and buy assets in our country because our interest rate is higher relative to other countries. What's that going to do? Well, in order to buy our Canadian assets, they're going to need to exchange their own. So their supply is going to shift to the right because they're going to supply more of their currency to us. And what is that going to do? Well, it's going to move down here, and the exchange rate goes down. When the exchange rate goes down, that means it appreciates our currency. It appreciates our currency. But what does that mean? Well, now other countries that are trading with us, it costs them more to convert their dollars to our dollars, right? Our prices have gone up relative to theirs, even though our prices haven't gone up in our economy itself. So our net exports is going to fall. And at the same time, now it's cheaper for us to exchange with that other country. We are relatively richer. So our imports are going to rise. So our exports fall and our imports rise. And this is going to cause the current account balance to fall, because remember, exports increase it and imports decrease it. On the other hand, just to kind of keep going on this point here, let's say there's a fall in demand for Canadian goods and services. Well, less people want to buy our goods. What's that mean? They're going to supply less of their currency. And that is going to raise the exchange rate. The exchange rate, E rate. And that's going to depreciate our dollar. Now, what happens when our dollar depreciates? Now, normally we'd have net exports rise because of that depreciation, but what it said here was that there was already a fall in demand. So net exports has essentially been the thing that's fallen, so it can't then rise again. So this also causes the current account balance to fall. So you'll notice in this situation the dollar appreciated, in this situation it depreciated, but in both situations the current account balance fell. So that's just trying to point out that there is no relationship between the exchange rate and the current account. There's no relationship that way. So if there was an increase in the interest rates, that's going to increase, it's going to appreciate our Canadian dollar, as I just talked about. If the central bank pegs the exchange rate below its free market equilibrium level, there will be. So sometimes there are some economies that like to set an exchange rate at a certain level. China does this. China is one of the main ones. I'm not sure of any others. Most of us have a flexible exchange rate. But what happens? So if they peg their exchange rate below its free market equilibrium. So let's draw that. The supply and demand for currency. And they peg their exchange rate down here. Well, now there is this excess demand. There's this excess demand right here. So how are they going to deal with that excess demand for their currency? Well, what they're going to do is they're going to sell foreign currency, because remember, this is excess demand for foreign, maybe I'll write that and type it, demand for foreign, oh my goodness, foreign currency. So there's excess demand for foreign currency. So that means that they are going to have to supply that extra demand for foreign currency. So they are going to sell foreign currency. Now, there's obviously some problems with doing that. And one of the main ones is that you don't have an unlimited supply of foreign currency. You're eventually going to run out. And then you're going to have to adjust your exchange rate, as China had to do in 2005, 2014, one of the two, I can't remember. They had to change it a little bit. Okay, there's another formula here. I will find it. Here it is. This formula is just showing how the current account is made up. It's made up of savings plus taxes minus government spending minus investment. So we can rearrange it to look like this middle one here, which is the answer there, S minus I plus T minus G. But what I also notice is you can rearrange it again to put the G before the T and then factor at the negative sign, and you get the primary deficit here. And what you see is that the current account deficit and the primary deficit are inversely related. So an increase in, sorry, this is not the current account deficit, it's just the current account balance. So if you increase your deficit, if this number goes up, that goes up, that's going to make the current account go down. So in essence, an increase in the deficit decreases your current account balance or increases your current account deficit, depending on if it's a deficit or a surplus, which comes up in another question here that I didn't get this time, but I might get at the end. And then this one here is pretty important. In Canada, proponents of the flexible exchange rate argue that the flexible exchange rate acts as a shock absorber. We mean that. So let's consider an external shock to the Canadian economy. So let's say aggregate demand falls. Okay, so we have our potential output, ADAS, and we say, whatever reason, aggregate demand falls. Well, what is that going to do? This is our price level, and this is our Y. So our price level has fallen. Now, because our price level has fallen and we have a flexible exchange rate instead of having a fixed one, if we had a fixed one, this wouldn't be the case. But because our prices have fallen, well, now that's going to stimulate that's going to stimulate net exports, right? Because now more countries want to buy our goods because they're so cheap. So what that's going to do is, even though we're in a recession here and we have less employment, the flexible exchange rate acts as a buffer or an automatic stabilizer. And what we end up getting is aggregate demand moves a bit more over here to AD3 because of our net exports is then going to go up and our unemployment is going to go down because now more people want to buy our goods. So that's going to help with AD a bit. So I have a lot of notes. I'm going to go through. My fan's a little crazy now, but that's okay. We did that, so I'll skip that. So this is another example from the homework of what the capital service account would be. So the balance of payments is made up of the current account plus the capital account. And the current account, remember, is made up of the trade account, the capital service account, and net transfers. So we have no net transfers here, so we can assume that's 0. We have a trade account, and it's asking us what's the capital service account. So exports minus imports is 100, plus whatever the capital service account is, plus the capital account, which is the inflows of 60, minus the outflows, has to equal to 0. So just solving, we get x is equal to negative 60, which was the answer to that question. This next one here, if Canadian exports and goods and services were 36 billion, so exports are 36 billion, imports are 30 billion, transfers to foreigners are 3 billion, and transfers from foreigners are 5 billion. So that's net transfers. The current account balance would be, well, we want exports minus imports, so 36 minus 30. And then we want the amount that's coming in that will raise our current account, right? So the amount that's coming in from foreigners is 5 billion, minus the amount that's going out, 3 billion, and that's equal to 8. So C. This next one here, consider the balance of payments. Right, this one. Okay, I don't really like the answer for this one because I don't know how exactly to explain it. But what you're supposed to see here is that the current account has exports minus imports minus investment is 140. So that means that the capital account has to equal, well, we know it's inflows minus outflows plus something else. And then when you add all those together, you get 0. So x is equal to negative 70. And then the way I solve it, I get negative 140. But the correct answer here is C, an increase of 140 billion. I'm not totally sure why, if I'm being honest. Their investments increase by 140. I'm not totally sure. The 5-year-olds in my neighborhood are having a party or something, and they're banging pots and pans. Okay, cool. So just walking through some examples here. Suppose U.S. demand for Canadian exports decreases. So the decreased demand for our products means less U.S. dollars is being exchanged for Canadian dollars. So that means the supply reduces, our exchange rate goes up, and the Canadian dollars depreciate. In the example where we had less demand for our exports. What about inflation? So this one I thought was kind of interesting because we're going to see two changes when inflation happens. So if our Canadian dollar is inflating, and the US dollar is not, we'll say. You can use the US dollar, you can use currencies worldwide. I just like to use the US because it makes it a little bit easier. So a rise in our Canadian prices is going to make it less appealing to foreigners. So they're going to supply less currency because they're going to exchange less of their own currency for ours because our goods are too expensive now. So our supply is going to shift left. But now that our prices are so expensive and the other prices in other countries are not, we're going to demand more of their currency. So I'm going to say, I don't want to buy Canadian helicopters. They're $10,000, whereas US helicopters are only $5,000. So I'm going to go buy helicopters from the US, and I need US dollars to do that. So my demand for US dollars has increased. And when we increase both of those things, we notice we establish a new equilibrium here with a higher exchange rate. So inflation depreciates our dollar, which makes sense, right? Because now there's more of our dollars in the system. So we have inflation, and our dollar is worth less. A couple more from the homework. You hear that the Canadian dollar is at 86 cents US. What is the exchange rate? So there's a couple of these. Just divide 1 by the number and you get your exchange rate, right? Because it's we want to find out how many. We want to find the Canadian dollar price of 1 US dollar. We know how much. We know that 1 Canadian dollar is worth 86 cents. So how much is 1 US dollar worth? $1.16. Okay, so this is a bunch of examples from the that's a depreciation. From the homework, and I thought they were pretty good at like getting the point across of what you were supposed to do. So, and it's just good practice. So we'll go over them. So A is the quantity of oil imports is greatly increased, but the expenditure on imported oil is lower because of price decreases. So a drop in price means that less foreign exchange is needed to buy oil, so we demand less of it. Kind of disregarding the first part here. We don't really care about that. We want to see that the price of oil has dropped, which means we need to exchange less of our own currency to get the other currency to buy it. So our demand has fallen, our exchange rate falls, which appreciates our currency. B I didn't graph out just because it talks about inflation, and we just talked about that. So if your inflation is higher than your trading partners, your currency is going to depreciate, kind of what we just showed there. C, decreasing labor costs in the country's manufacturers lead to a better ability to compete in world markets. First of all, that just sounds appealing, so you're like, it probably appreciated, as like most of these you can kind of figure out just in how appealing they sound, but to actually graph it out, if we have decreasing input costs, then we're going to have decreasing prices, right? And when our prices are going to go down, that makes people want to buy our stuff. So our net exports is going to go up. As exports go up, more of your currency is demanded, and right, because they're going to need your currency to buy your stuff. So they're going to supply more of their own currency in exchange. And when they supply more, we get to this new equilibrium point here. Exchange rate falls and our currency appreciates. Question D. The government greatly expands its gifts of food and machinery to developing countries. Assume the gifts substitute for purchases of the home country exports. So normally gifts do nothing. Gifts would not appreciate or depreciate your currency at all. However, it says here that the gifts substitute for purchases of the home country exports. So instead of the other country purchasing our exports, we're giving them away for free. What does that mean? It means that they're going to supply, because they don't need to buy our stuff, they're getting it for free, that they don't need to exchange their currency for ours. So the supply is going to fall, right? The supply is going to fall. And that increases the exchange rate, which decreases our dollar, or depreciates our dollar, sorry. D is depreciation. E, the central bank raises interest rates sharply. So I talked about interest rates before. Higher interest rates mean investments make more money, so foreigners will transfer liquid assets from other countries to ours. And to do that, to buy our assets, they're going to need more of our currency, so they're going to have to exchange more of their own currency, which is going to increase the supply. That is going to lower the exchange rate, which appreciates our currency. Lastly, F. Less domestic oil is discovered and developed. Again, that sounds like a bad thing. So if less oil is discovered, then the people who do discover oil can charge a higher price for it because there is more demand, there's less supply. And what that means is with those higher prices, less people are going to want it. And that includes foreigners who may have previously been importing it. You may have previously been exporting it to them, but now they say, no, it's too expensive. So that means that they're going to trade less of their own dollars for our dollars to buy our oil because they don't want to buy it anymore, so the supply is going to go down. That's going to increase the exchange rate, which will depreciate our currency. Couple more. We went over these. Textbook talks about purchasing power parity theory, which is just the idea that the price of a basket of identical goods in two countries should be the same when expressed in one unit of currency. So for example, if a basket costs 1,000 euros in Europe and the exchange rate is 1.5, so 1.5 Canadian dollars are needed to buy 1 euro, that's how we always talk about the exchange rate, at least in this course, then the same basket should cost 1.5 in Canada, because you do 1,000 times 1.5 equals 1,500. If this is not true, then people are going to buy the cheaper basket. If the basket only costs $1,400 in Canada, then Europeans would buy our basket because it's the identical basket, but it's cheaper. So to go over this in an example from the homework here, it says purchasing power parity theory would suggest that if the Canadian price of a basket of goods is $1,800, but that same basket in the United States is $1,200, and the actual exchange rate is 1.4 to 1, then the value of the Canadian dollar should. So let's look at this from the US standpoint because it's telling us what the value of the Canadian dollar should be. So we can't use Canadian dollar in the calculation. So we have to see that the same basket is 1,200 and the exchange rate is 1.4. So 1,200 times 1.4 is 1,680, but the basket costs 1,800, which is too high. How much too high is it? Well, if we calculate the percentage, which you just do by new minus old over old, you get it's 7.1% too high. So it should depreciate by 7.1%. And we went over this formula. So I'll do a quiz quickly, and hopefully I will get 10 out of 10. This isn't the easiest topic, and I probably should have read more, but oh well. Consider the components of Canada's balance of payments account. Payments by Canadians of interest and dividends on foreign-owned capital. That's going to be a debit to the current account because it's decreasing our current account. How do you decrease it with a debit? And it's in the current account, not the capital account, because it has to do with these income dividends or whatever, that thing. That's why. What is the current account balance? We did this one. 50 minus 500, sorry, minus 350 is 150, minus 60 is 90. For Canada, the term exchange rate, as used by most economists, refers to, that is the thought it was more clear than that. The price of foreign currency in exchange for Canadian dollars. It is not Canadian exports minus imports for the exchange rate. It's not the price at which purchases and sales of foreign goods take place in Canada. The ratio of Canadian export exchange rate has nothing to do with exports and imports. Dividends from foreign sources, definitely not. All right, C. Consider the market in which Canadian dollars are exchanged for British pounds. An increased preference in Canadian consumers for British goods would shift the demand to the right and increase the exchange rate. We did that one already. If the exchange rate is E1, then let's look at E1. What's bigger, supply or demand? Oh, supply is. There's excess supply of foreign exchange. That's like chapter 3. Long-term international capital movements, that's the business thing. We can expect that an increase in Canadian interest rates caused by monetary contraction would increase the external value of the Canadian dollar. It's going to appreciate our currency relative to other currencies. If the central bank pegs the exchange rate below its free market equilibrium level, then there will be excess demand for foreign exchange, and the central bank will sell foreign currency. We did that one too. The problem of twin deficits refers to that is both having a budget deficit and a deficit in the current account. So you remember when I rearranged that formula? That's kind of what it's talking about there. And it's sometimes the case. This one, okay, we haven't done this. According to the PPP, the Canadian-US exchange rate in 2014 should have been, 2014. Price level in Canada is this, price level in US is this. I believe it's this one. I might actually be wrong here. So what I did was I did 115 divided by 122. So that would be the Canadian dollar price of 1 unit of USD. Let me just submit this and see if I'm right. And if I am, then I'll explain. No, I'm wrong. Okay. That's okay. 1.06. Oh, there's some... Ooh. Give me a second to figure this out. Oh, okay. It's just 122 divided by 115 to get the exchange rate. And if the exchange rate is higher than 1, then it means it's undervalued. Because okay. Comparing with the nominal exchange rate. I was wondering why that's there. So the nominal exchange rate is 1.15, but the actual exchange rate according to PPP should have been 1.06. And that is lower, so it's undervalued. I hope that last bit didn't confuse you guys. I hope you enjoyed these videos. Yeah, good luck on the exam, guys.